Part 1 of An Old-Fashioned Thanksgiving by Louisa May Alcott. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Narrator, read by Maria Therese.
Mrs. Bassett, read by Elizabeth Klett.
Seth Bassett, read by Stephanie Heinrichs.
Saul Bassett, read by Grace Garrett.
Tilly Bassett, read by Eden Ray Hedrick.
Roxy, read by Lynn Silva.
Rhodey, read by Charlotte Duckett.
Prue Bassett, read by Ariel Lipshaw.
Mr. Bassett, read by Todd.
F. Bassett, read by Samantha Gubitz.
Gad Hopkins, read by Bill Mosley.
Aunt Cynthia, read by Lynn Thompson.
Part 1. 60 years ago, up among the New Hampshire hills, lived Farmer Bassett, with a houseful of sturdy sons and daughters growing up about him. They were poor in money, but rich in land and love, for the wide acres of wood, corn, and pasture land fed, warmed, and clothed the flock, while mutual patience, affection, and courage made the old farmhouse a very happy home. November had come. The crops were in, and barn, buttery, and bin were overflowing with the harvest that rewarded the summer's hard work. The big kitchen was a jolly place just now, for in the great fireplace roared a cheerful fire. On the walls hung garlands of dried apples, onions, and corn. Up aloft from the beams shone crook-necked squashes, juicy hams, and dried venison. For in those days deer still haunted the deep forests, and hunters flourished. Savoury smells were in the air. On the crane hung steaming kettles, and down among the red embers copper saucepans simmered, all suggestive of some approaching feast. A white-headed baby lay in the old blue cradle that had rocked 7 other babies, now and then lifting his head to look out, like a round full moon, then subsided to kick and crow contentedly, and suck the rosy apple he had no teeth to bite. 2 small boys sat on the wooden settle shelling corn for popping, and picking out the biggest nuts from the goodly store their own hands had gathered in October. 4 young girls stood at the long dresser, busily chopping meat, pounding spice, and slicing apples, and the tongues of Tilly, Prue, Roxy, and Rhodey went as fast as their hands. Farmer Bassett and F., the oldest boy, were "chorn round" outside, for Thanksgiving was at hand, and all must be in order for that time-honoured day. To and fro from table to hearth bustled buxom Mrs. Bassett, flushed and flowery, but busy and blithe as the queen bee of this busy little hive should be.
I do like to begin seasonable, and have things to my mind. Thanksgiving dinners can't be drove, and it does take a sight of victuals to fill all these hungry stomachs,"
said the good woman, as she gave a vigorous stir to the great kettle of cider apple sauce, and cast a glance of housewifely pride at the fine array of pies set forth on the buttery shelves.
Only one more day and then it will be time to eat. I didn't take but 1 bowl of hasty pudding this morning, so I shall have plenty of room when the nice things come,"
confided Seth the Soul, as he cracked a large hazelnut as easily as a squirrel.
No need of my starving beforehand. I always have room enough, and I'd like to have Thanksgiving every day,"
answered Solomon, gloating like a young ogre over the little pig that lay near by, ready for roasting.
"Oh, sakes alive, I don't, boys. It's a mercy it don't come but once a year. I should be worn to a thread paper with all this extra work atop o' my winter weaving and spinning,"
laughed their mother, as she plunged her plump arms into the long bread trowel and began to knead the dough as if a famine was at hand. Tilly, the oldest girl, a red-cheeked, black-eyed lass of 14, was grinding briskly at the mortar, for spices were costly and not a grain must be wasted. Prue kept time with the chopper, and the twins sliced away at the apples till their little brown arms ached, for all knew how to work, and did so now with a will.
I think it's real fun to have Thanksgiving at home. I'm sorry Grandma's sick, so we can't go there as usual, but I like to mess round here, don't you girls?
asked Tilly, pausing to take a sniff at the spicy pestle.
It will be kind of lonesome with only our own folks.
"I like to see all the cousins and aunts, and have games and sing,"
cried the twins, who were regular little romps, and could run, swim, coast, and shout as well as their brothers.
I don't care a mite for all that. It will be so nice to eat dinner together, warm and comfortable at home,"
said quiet Prue, who loved her own cosy nooks like a cat.
"Come, girls, fly round and get your chores done. so we can clear away for dinner just as soon as I clap my bread into the oven,"
called Mrs. Bassett presently, as she rounded off the last loaf of brown bread, which was to feed the hungry mouse that seldom tasted any other.
"Here's a man coming up the hill lively."
"Guess it's Gad Hopkins. Pa told him to bring a dozen oranges if they weren't too high,"
shouted Sol and Seth, running to the door while the girls smacked their lips at the thought of this rare treat, and Baby threw his apple overboard, as if getting ready for a new cargo. But all were doomed to disappointment, for it was not Gad, with the much desired fruit. It was a stranger who threw himself off his horse and hurried up to Mr. Bassett in the yard with some brief message that made the farmer drop his axe and look so sober that his wife guessed at once some bad news had come, and crying,
"Mother's worse, I know she is,"
out ran the good woman, forgetful of the flower on her arms and the oven waiting for its most important batch. The man said old Mr. Chadwick down to Keene stopped him as he passed and told him to tell Mrs. Bassett her mother was failin' fast and she'd better come to-day. He knew no more, and having delivered his errand he rode away, saying it looked like snow and he must be jogging or he wouldn't get home till night.
"We must go right off, Eldad. Hitch up, and I'll be ready in less'n no time,"
said Mrs. Bassett, wasting not a minute in tears and lamentations, but pulling off her apron as she went in, with her mind in a sad jumble of bread, anxiety, turkey, sorrow, haste, and cider apple sauce. A few words told the story, and the children left their work to help her get ready, mingling their grief for "Grandma" with regrets for the lost dinner.
"I'm dreadful sorry, dears, but it can't be helped. I couldn't cook nor eat no way now, and if that blessed woman gets better sudden, as she has before, we'll have cause for Thanksgiving, and I'll give you a dinner you won't forget in a hurry,"
said Mrs. Bassett as she tied on her brown silk pumpkin hood with a sob for the good old mother who had made it for her. Not a child complained after that, but ran about helpfully, bringing moccasins, heating the footstone, and getting ready for a long drive, because Grandma lived 20 miles away, and there were no railroads in those days to whisk people to and fro like magic. By the time the old yellow sleigh was at the door, the bread was in the oven, and Mrs. Bassett was waiting, with her camlet cloak on, and the baby done up like a small bale of blankets.
"Now, Eph, you must look after the cattle like a man, and keep up the fires, for there's a storm brewing, and neither the children nor dumb creatures must suffer,"
said Mr. Bassett, as he turned up the collar of his rough coat and put on his blue mittens, while the old mare shook her bells as if he preferred a trip to Keene to hauling wood all day.
"Tilly, put extry comfortables on the beds tonight, the wind is so searchin' up chamber. Have the baked beans and Injun puddin' for dinner, and whatever you do, don't let the boys get at the mince pies or you'll have them down sick. I shall come back the minute I can leave Mother. Pa will come to-morrow anyway, so keep snug and be good. I depend on you, my daughter. Use your jedgment, and don't let nothing happen while Mother's away."
Yes'm, yes'm, goodbye.
Goodbye,
called the children, as Mrs. Bassett was packed into the sleigh and driven away, leaving a stream of directions behind her. F, the 16-year-old boy, immediately put on his biggest boots, assumed a sober, responsible manner, and surveyed his little responsibilities with a paternal air, drolly like his father's. Tilly tied on her mother's bunch of keys, rolled up the sleeves of her homespun gown, and began to order about the younger girls. They soon forgot poor Granny, and found it great fun to keep house all alone, for Mother seldom left home, but ruled her family in the good old-fashioned way. There were no servants, for the little daughters were Mrs. Bassett's only maids, and the stout boys helped their father, all working happily together with no wages but love, learning in the best manner the use of the heads and hands with which they were to make their own way in the world. The few flakes that caused the farmer to predict bad weather soon increased to a regular snowstorm with gusts of wind, for up among the hills winter came early and lingered long. But the children were busy, gay, and warm indoors, and never minded the rising gale nor the whirling white storm outside. Tilly got them a good dinner, and when it was over the two elder girls went to their spinning, for in the kitchen stood the big and little wheels and baskets of wool rolls, ready to be twisted into yarn for the winter's knitting, and each day brought its stint of work to the daughters, who hoped to be as thrifty as their mother. F kept up the glorious fire and superintended the small boys, who popped corn and whittled boats on the hearth, while Roxy and Rhodey dressed corncob dolls in the settle corner, and Bose, the brindled mastiff, laid on the braided mat, luxuriously warming his old legs. Thus employed, they made a pretty picture. These rosy boys and girls in their homespun suits, and the rustic toys or tasks which most children nowadays would find very poor or tiresome. Tilly and Prue sang as they stepped to and fro, drawing out the smoothly twisted threads to the musical hum of the great spinning wheels. The little girls chattered like magpies over their dolls, and the new bedspread they were planning to make, all white dimity stars on a blue calico ground, as a Christmas present to Ma. The boys roared at F's jokes, and had rough and tumble games over Bose, who didn't mind them in the least, and so the afternoon wore pleasantly away. At sunset the boys went out to feed the cattle, bring in heaps of wood, and lock up for the night, as the lonely farmhouse seldom had visitors after dark. The girls got the simple supper of brown bread and milk, baked apples, and a doughnut all round as a treat. Then they sat before the fire, the sisters knitting, the brothers with books or games, for F loved reading, and Sol and Seth never failed to play a few games of Morris with barleycorns on the little board they had made themselves at one corner of the dresser.
"Read out a piece,"
said Tilly from Mother's chair, where she sat in state, finishing off the 6th woolen sock she had knit that month.
"It's the old history book, but here's a bit you may like since it's about our folks,"
answered F, turning the yellow page to look at a picture of 2 quaintly dressed children in some ancient castle.
"Yes, read that. I always like to hear about Lady Matildy I was named for. And Lord Bassett, Pa's great-great-great-grandpa. He's only a farmer now, but it's nice to know that we were somebody 200 or 300 years ago,"
said Tilly, bridling and tossing her curly head, as she fancied the Lady Matilda might have done.
Don't read the queer words, 'cause we don't understand them. Tell it,
commanded Roxy from the cradle, where she was drowsily cuddled with Rhodey.
"Well, a long time ago, when Charles I was in prison, Lord Bassett was a true friend to him,"
began F, plunging into his story without delay.
"The Lord had some papers that would have hung a lot of people if the king's enemies got a hold of them. So, when he heard one day, all of a sudden, that soldiers were at the castle gate to carry him off, he had just time to call his girl to him and say, 'I may be going to my death, but I won't betray my master. There is no time to burn the papers, and I cannot take them with me. They are hidden in the old leathern chair where I sit. No one knows this but you, and you must guard them till I come, or send you a safe messenger to take them away. Promise me to be brave and silent, and I can go without fear.' You see, he wasn't afraid to die, but he was to seem a traitor. Lady Matildy promised solemnly, and the words were hardly out of her mouth when the men came in, and her father was carried away a prisoner and sent off to the Tower."
But she didn't cry. She just called her brother and sat down in that chair with her head leaning back on those papers like a queen, and waited while the soldiers hunted the house over for 'em. Wasn't that a smart girl?"
cried Tilly, beaming with pride, for she was named for this ancestress, and knew the story by heart.
"I reckon she was scared, though, when the men came swearing in and asked her if she knew anything about it. The boy did his part then, for he didn't know, and fired up and stood before his sister, and he says he, as bold as a lion, 'If my lord had told us where the papers be, we would die before we would betray him. But we are children and know nothing, and it is cowardly of you to try to fright us with oaths and drawn swords.'"
As F quoted from the book, Seth planted himself before Tilly with a long poker in his hand, saying as he flourished it valiantly,
Why didn't the boy take his father's sword and lay about him? I would, if anyone was harsh to Tilly."
"You bantam! He was only a bit of a boy and couldn't do anything. Sit down and hear the rest of it,"
commanded Tilly with a pat on the yellow head and a private resolve that Seth should have the largest piece of pie at dinner next day as reward for his chivalry.
"Well, the men went off after turning the castle out of the window, but they said they should come again, so faithful Matildy was full of trouble, and hardly dared to leave the room where the chair stood. All day she sat there, and at night her sleep was so full of fear about it that she often got up and went to see that all was safe. The servants thought the fright had hurt her wits, and let her be, but Rupert, the boy, stood by her and never was afraid of her queer ways. She was a pious maid, the book says, and often spent the long evenings reading the Bible with her brother by her, all alone in the great room, with no one to help her bear her secret, and no good news of her father. At last, word came that the king was dead, and his friends banished out of England. Then the poor children were in a sad plight, for they had no mother, and the servants all ran away, leaving only one faithful old man to help them.
But the father did come,
cried Roxy eagerly.
You'll see,
continued F, half telling, half reading.
Matilda was sure he would. So she sat on in the big chair, guarding the papers, and no one could get her away, till one day a man came with her father's ring, and told her to give up the secret. She knew the ring, but would not tell until she had asked many questions so as to be very sure. And while the man answered all about her father and the king, she looked at him sharply. Then she stood up and said in a tremble, for there was something strange about the man, Sir, I doubt you in spite of the ring, and I will not answer till you pull off the false beard you wear, that I may see your face, and know if you are my father's friend or foe. Off came the disguise, and Matilda found it was my lord himself, come to take them with him out of England. He was very proud of that faithful girl, I guess, for the old chair still stands in the castle, and the name keeps in the family, Pa says, even over here, where some of the Bassets came along with the Pilgrims.
Our Tilly would have been as brave, I know, and she looks like the old picture down to Grandma's, don't she, Eph?
cried Prue, who admired her bold, bright sister very much.
Well, I think you do the settin' part best, Prue, you are so patient. Till would fight like a wild cat, but she can't hold her tongue with her scent,
answered Eph, whereat Tilly pulled his hair, and the story ended with a general frolic. When the moon-faced clock behind the door struck 9, Tilly tucked up the children under the extra comfortables, and having kissed them all round, as mother did, crept into her own nest, never minding the little drifts of snow that sifted in upon her coverlet between the shingles of the roof, nor the storm that raged without. As if he felt the need of unusual vigilance, old Bose laid down on the mat before the door, and Pussy had the warm hearth all to herself. If any late wanderer had looked in at midnight, he would have seen the fire blazing up again, and in the cheerful glow the old cat blinking her yellow eyes, as she sat bolt upright beside the spinning-wheel, like some sort of household goblin, guarding the children while they slept. End of Part 1.